A month ago, we had a strategic brainstorming to guide our common action on defense. And today, we are delivering, and we are moving decisively towards a strong and more sovereign Europe of defense. Since 2022 in Versailles, we have been assuming greater responsibility for our defense. But today, we have decided to aim much higher, guided by a new sense of urgency. I thank the Commission, and especially Ursula von der Leyen, for presenting a first package of proposals ahead of the White Paper on Defence. On that basis, we have taken concrete decisions to provide new resources, new tools, new instruments for our defence capabilities. That means to invest in our economy and to protect our citizens. First, we have decided to invest in priority areas already defined by the European Defence Agency, reflecting the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine and in full coherence with NATO. Air and missile defence, artillery systems, missiles and ammunition, drones and anti-drone systems, strategic enablers, military mobility, artificial intelligence, cyber and electronic warfare. Second, we have decided to mobilize additional public and private funds for our defence. We will create a new European instrument up to 150 billion euros to support Member States in boosting the defence capabilities needed. On top of that, leaders were today that we need flexibility within the Stability and Growth Pact, because Member States will invest much more in defence, and our common fiscal rules need to allow them to do so in a sustained and sustainable way. Flexibility in channeling existing European funds to defence will also be important for those Member States that choose to do so. Also, the European Investment Bank's initiative to broaden its mandate for more loans to the defence sector will improve access to private financing and have a positive effect on private banks. Third, we decided to invest better and more efficiently together with joint procurement through standardization and simplification. Our decisions today send a clear message. We are putting our money where our mouth is. We are delivering on what we promised: to build our deterrence, to strengthen the security of our citizens, and in the process, to boost Europe's competitiveness and our technological and industrial base. A stronger European defence also provides deterrence for Ukraine. Our efforts to strengthen European defence will also benefit Ukraine, because Ukraine's security is at the core of Europe's security. We haven't been with Ukraine since day one. We have already provided then 135 billion euros in support to Ukraine since 2022. Our supporting is unwavering. If the war continues, in any future peace negotiations, in reconstruction, in accession to the European Union. And we have now committed to increasing our support even more. Immediately, Member States can increase their support thanks to the increased fiscal space. Several Member States have already announced their pledge up to 15 billion euros. Today, we have also tasked the Council to work urgently on further initiatives to address Ukraine's pressing military and defence needs. At the same time, we are preparing to support Ukraine for when it decides to engage in negotiations to help it reach a positive outcome. That means a just and lasting peace. This is a tipping moment for Europe. And today, we have shown that the European Union is rising to the challenge, building the Europe of defense and standing to shoulder. Because at the end of the day, what we will all want, what we all deserve, what we are all working for is peace and security. Thank you.
President von der Leyen.
Yes, first of all, too tired. I wanted to start in German, but now I'm going to speak English. Sorry. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Antonio, that you convened this extraordinary EUCOM, because I think today history is being written. We are coming out of this European Council very determined to ensure Europe's security and to act with the scale, the speed and the resolve that this situation demands. We are determined to invest better and to invest faster together. From Paris to London to Brussels, we have shown that we are willing and able to step up our joint efforts and to coordinate effectively. Fact is that Europe is facing a clear and present danger. And this is why I presented the Rearm Europe plan today to the leaders, a plan to give Europe the military capability that it needs to face today's threats. It could mobilize up to 800 billion, taking more responsible on our shoulders for our own security because the urgency is real. And therefore we agreed that with the support of the leaders, the Commission will present before the next European Council, the regular European Council in March, the detailed legal proposals. Let me explain the 5 different elements. The first is we will propose to activate the national escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact in a controlled, coordinated and time-bound manner. This will allow Member States greater fiscal flexibility that they need and give them the space to invest in defence immediately and substantially. This is unprecedented in defence. Utilised, this could unlock up to 650 billion euros in defence expenditure. The second point is that we will propose a new financial instrument. We will provide 150 billion euros in loans to Member States to accelerate the joint procurement. This is an exceptional measure, but it is the right measure for exceptional times. These funds could be used for European capabilities in selected domains, and you have to repeat them again. The deliveries must be swift, and the loans should finance purchases from European producers, and the loans can be invested in contracts that are multi-annual. That is very important for the defence industry. This is also a way to enhance in the joint procurement interoperability, so less fragmentation. It will, of course, reduce cost because it will enable scaling up. That is so important for the production, all at once and very fast. The third element is a voluntary one. It is the possibility to redirect the existing EU budget towards defence, and here the focus is on the cohesion funds. Again, it is a voluntary possibility. If you want to have the cohesion funds flexibilized, you can redirect them into defence matters. And then, besides the discussion about the public funding today, we also had a discussion about how to attract more private investment, private capital. And here is very important that we push forward the European Savings and Investment Union. It is crucial for private investment, but also that the European Investment Bank will change and update its lending patterns. We must make sure that our defence industry, particularly our innovative startups and the mid-caps, have full access to financing. Now, finally, we will soon present the white paper on the future of European defence. This will be also on the 19th of March, right before the regular European Council, and we will present a simplification omnibus for defence. Let me very briefly finish with the fact that we had a very important exchange with President Zelensky at lunch. We spoke about how to achieve a just and lasting peace. Our support for Ukraine's armed forces has never been more urgent, and therefore we will work very closely with Ukraine and the defence industry to ensure that Ukraine's military needs are met. This discussion is important for the Member States and for our partners, and this is why the two of us tomorrow will also debrief to our partners tomorrow in the morning after this European Council.
Thank you very much. Let me open the floor for questions. I'll start with Luis.
Thank you. Luis Tovar, Informativos 35 Spanish TV. I have two questions. One for you, President Costa. I will use Spanish as there is interpretation. Hoy hemos visto como Hungría no ha querido apoyar las conclusiones sobre Ucrania, unas conclusiones con párrafos que Hungría ha firmado muchas veces en el pasado. Mi pregunta es si es realista sostener una nueva unidad europea solo a 26 y qué supone en el momento en el que estamos que un país como Hungría no haya firmado estas conclusiones. And for you, Madam President, I will ask you in English. Also on Ukraine, the conclusion says that there can be no negotiations that affect European security without European involvement. But in the recent weeks, we have witnessed many gestures of disdain from the American administration, such as J.D. Vance's speeches in Munich, the meeting last week in the White House. So my question is, how can they be convinced that Europe must be on the table, and if there is a plan, the idea of involve Europe? And the more long question is, if I may, how long should European Union continue to observe this situation in the United States without responding? What is the limit at which we must stand up to the United States? Thank you.
Vale. Todos queremos paz. La diferencia es que 26 creen que el camino por la paz es reforzando la capacidad de defensa de Ucrania. Hungría se ha aislado de este consenso. Un país desolado no crea una división. Los 26 siguen unidos con una posición común y que van a seguir apoyando a Ucrania como habíamos hecho desde el día 1, el 24 de febrero de 2022. Así seguiremos.
So, we all want a peace through strength, a just and lasting peace, but a peace from a position of strength. And this is also in the interest of President Trump, to have a peace through strength. And if he wants to achieve this, it is only possible with the support of the European Union and its member states, because preconditions have to be met. We have been the ones, for example, who have secured the economic survival of Ukraine for the year 2025. We are the ones who now invest a lot in Ukrainian defense industry and are providing the military capabilities that Ukraine needs. We were the ones and are the ones who are making sure that the energy system in Ukraine survives. During the winter, we provided 1.8 gigawatt of energy to the energy system, which made it possible to go through the winter. So many examples that show how important the support of Europe is. to come to a positive end, which is a peace through strength. This is in everyone's interest.
Thank you. Ana?
Hi, Ana Matos Neves of the Portuguese news agency Lusa. I will start with a question in Portuguese for the President of the European Council. Nas conclusões sobre defesa, os líderes da UE pediram à Comissão Europeia fontes de financiamento adicionais. Portanto, eu gostaria de saber quais é que foram os principais mecanismos mencionados na sala e se eventualmente que países é que falaram ou que admitiram uma nova emissão de dívida conjunta, uma espécie de novo PRR para a defesa como tem vindo a ser defendido por Portugal. And for you, Madam President, I would like to know what was the leaders' reaction to your plan, and when do you think that this new instrument, is some sort of SURE 2.0 for defense, can be in place, and if you fear that somehow only 19 member states use it, as it happened with SURE. And regarding the activation of the national escape clause, do you also fear that not all the member states do that? And taking into account that these tools are all voluntary, could this jeopardize your plan? Thank you so much.
Bom, o Conselho Europeu acolheu de uma forma bastante entusiástica as propostas da Comissão, que são propostas que, no conjunto, permitem investir mais 800 mil milhões de euros em defesa através de diferentes instrumentos. Muito importante, que é existir um novo fundo de 150 mil milhões, mas também permitir a flexibilização também a flexibilização da utilização dos fundos europeus. E o Conselho acolheu como muito positivo estas medidas. Estas medidas surgiram em antecipação àquilo que é o livro branco sobre defesa que a Comissão apresentará no próximo mês. Seguramente no livro branco serão consideradas outras alternativas. E aquilo que os Estados-membros pediram à Comissão é que as apresente todas, estudando-as, com os seus prós, os seus contras, e o Conselho depois tomará as devidas decisões. Neste momento não há nenhum tabu, todas as soluções estão em cima da mesa e todas elas serão discutidas e, em função da discussão, tomaremos as decisões que tivermos que tomar.
So there's a huge pressure on all member states to increase their defense spending and to have literally a surge in defense. And therefore the plan, the rearm plan with the 5 elements was very much welcomed by all leaders. I am absolutely confident that it will be used. You're right, the loan instrument, the new instrument, might be interesting not for all member states. It's interesting for those member states where the Commission's loans have more favorable interest rates than they would be able to achieve at the capital market. This is approximately 20 member states, as we have been calculating. But for them, of course, it is crucial. Then triggering the national escape clause is also crucial for all member states because it gives them the much demanded and asked for fiscal space they did not have so far without being dragged in an excessive deficit procedure. The member states have been asking since quite a while for possibilities to have more flexibility because they see the absolute urgency to invest more in defense, and now this possibility is on its way.
Okay. Rick?
Hi, Rick Rutten, NSA, the Netherlands. Thank you for doing this. You've been able, both of you, to make significant progress this week by finding ways to override vetoes in the case of the Commission and the Rearm Europe plan by invoking Article 122. And in the case of the Council today, we've seen the annex for Hungary. I'm curious to know, how happy are you that you've now clearly found effective ways to break the gridlock and move ahead on these topics in a much more speedy way than before?
Well, from my part, I'm very happy. A month ago, we have just a brainstorming, and now we have concrete proposals coming from the European Commission, And we have agreed by unanimity on defense. And on Ukraine, we remain with a strong support from 26 out of 27 member states in the common position. In fact, as you know, Hungary is a different strategic approach on Ukraine. But that means that Hungary is isolated among the 27. And we respect Hungary's position, but it's one out of 27. And 26 are more than one.
Yes, we chose the Article 122 because of the urgency and the speed that is necessary. And I forgot to answer that part of your question. It's more a question of weeks than months to have this proposal agreed upon, because only a council decision is necessary for that. So it's a very speedy procedure. And the treaty foresees exactly an emergency situation like we have it right now, to use then the Article 122. Insofar, I'm, like you, happy about it.
Okay. I'll take one final question, Shona.
Thanks very much. Just on the United States, will it be possible for Europe to give security guarantees to Ukraine without any US backstop? And then just another question on Hungary, given that obviously it decided not to go with the conclusions on Ukraine. Is that what we have to expect going forward, in particular when it comes to the rollover of sanctions and so on? Was that mentioned, or are you concerned that Hungary might veto this in the future? Thank you.
First of all, the best security guarantee are the Ukrainians themselves. Since 24th of February 2022, the Ukrainian army is resisting. A lot of people believed at that time that they cannot resist more than 3 days, then more than 3 weeks. Now they are resisting more than 3 years. And we stand for Ukraine since day one, and we will continue. And we will continue even after the war. First, as member state of the European Union, and also we have decided, are in the conclusions, that we will explore our capabilities in the treaty framework to contribute for security guarantees. Of course, security guarantees for the future of Ukraine are essential for the security of Europe, but also for the international security. Because this war is not only about Ukraine, it's about the respect of international law, is the respect of international rules-based order, is the respect of sovereignty, territorial integrity, safe borders. And these are fundamental values enshrined in the United Nations Charter. That is a global issue, and of course we count with all of the countries in the world to support, to ensure the enforcement of the international law. The results in the last week in the General Assembly show the large support to Ukraine, and that's very clear that the international law must prevail and the war must be defeated.
And I can complement what you said, Antonio, in regard of the best security guarantee is the Ukrainian army. What we're working on with the new instrument is to enable also our member states through the joint procurement to procure the necessary military capabilities that then can be given to Ukraine. Typical examples are Danish initiative or the Czech initiative. So there are already established procedures to do that. But of course, with the backing now of 150 billion euros, where a certain share should go then as capabilities to Ukraine, this is also a big push forward to maintain the strength of this outstanding army.
Yes, and with the escape clause, they can also increase
That's true.
immediately.
On
And
a
in
national
fact,
basis.
several member states have already made their pledge up to 15 billion up of the current the
State of play.
the state.
Okay.
15,
1-5, huh?
1-5.
Yeah.
Okay.
The most important, the billion.
Sorry. Just on the second part of the question, just in relation to Hungary and whether this is the start of things to come, that potentially Hungary won't vote in favour of rolling over the next
Well,
sanctions.
since 2022, we have already approved 16 package. The last one 2 weeks ago. This is the fact. Okay.
Good night.
Thank you very much. That's it for tonight.
Hoje não deixam de fazer perguntas. A ver, eu até queria responder.